Water Quality District to order. Wendy, do we want to do roll call first?
Will do. Starting with Nancy Hendrickson.
I am here.
Steve Fancher.
Here.
Eric Mueller.
Here.
Dave Ritma. John Niyama. Shirley Craddock.
Present.
Lori Stegman indicated she was not able to attend. And Ann Gravitt indicated she was not able to attend.
May I take this moment to introduce Phil Ralston? To those of you who don't know, Phil is helping the port out and is in attendance today. And we're really grateful that the port has chosen to enlist Phil because I think he'll make a great contribution to our collective effort. Welcome, Phil.
Hey, thanks everybody. Good to see you. And I think Ken's going to be on, and he's actually the port rep. But good to see everybody.
Yeah, and that's not official till you all vote on that, but that's the move, though. That's the recommendation from the port.
Stay tuned for the next meeting. Thanks. And Corky Collier.
I'm here.
Probably eating. James Allison. See you, James. Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
Here.
Eric Molander.
Here.
Janelle Bell. Ed Washington.
Here.
Bob Salinger. So we have 9 board members and we're expecting at least one more.
Excellent. Thanks, Wendy. First up on our agenda, we have Colin Rowan and Bill Owen to talk about emergency management, give a presentation on emergency management and have board discussion. Colin and Bill, are you ready?
Ready to go. Thank you. Hi, Colin Rowan. I'm the Director of Planning and Public Affairs at MCDD, and thank you very much for having us here today. Today's discussion is on emergency management, and we are building on the last 2 presentations that we've had in front of this board, which is to really prepare you as board members for conversations upcoming around funding scenarios and future needs that are going to be going into the models and the scenarios that you'll be considering for the operating revenue in the future. So we want to make sure that you understand some of the work that we do, some of the known gaps in that work, as well as really ask you to provide some input to help shape those scenarios. So similar to the other meetings on flood safety, environment, and equity, we're going to give a presentation on what we do, where we see some future opportunities, and then have time at the end for conversation. In this presentation, I'm going to be joined by Bill Owen, who is our chief engineer. Bill is the incident commander for our incident management team, and I'm the backup incident commander. We'll touch on some of that in a little bit. And we also are joined by Alice Bush, who we're very grateful, who's joining us here from Multnomah County Emergency Management, because we're also going to touch on where MCDD and the new Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District is located in the hierarchy of emergency management, because it really is a regional effort that relies on partnerships and expertise outside of our organization. So we're going to touch on that as well. And just as a note for later in the discussion, we also have Matt Berlin here, who is, he was hired, I think in June, Matt started, and he's our emergency planner responsible for our emergency management program. So with that, Wendy, would you be able to share the slides, please, and maybe go to the second slide? Thank you.
See that?
Looks good to me. Thank you. So just a little bit of orientation in addition to what I just said. Emergency management overall, just as a concept and program, is really a comprehensive approach. And so the diagram that you see there, that graphic really shows all of the pieces that go into emergency management. It's a comprehensive approach to disasters that really promotes readiness, coordinated response, building on partnerships and making sure people know what their roles and responsibilities are, and builds on resiliency through preparedness and mitigation. And so it's something that MCDD has really leaned into in the last about 7 years when we had our first emergency manager position created, and really focused on getting all staff trained in FEMA's incident command system, and making really proactive moves towards being ready and being coordinated. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about what we have done. We're going to talk about some of those known gaps, and then really Alice will discuss how we sit in that regional response. And then finally, we're going to have just some of the known opportunities that we've identified that this new district hopefully will be able to accomplish, and then open it up for some discussion. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bill.
Okay, good afternoon all. Wendy, can you advance to the next slide, please? So let me talk a little bit about what we do today and identify a couple of gaps that staff sees to help button up some emergency management work that we do out even beyond, regardless of whether or not the urban flood district was moving forward. So the staff, it does train and does respond to flood emergencies currently. We've been doing this with a variety of staff for decades, and we continue to do this as part of our core mission statement. And we're able to do this in part efficiently by following the what a national standard is, which is an incident command system. This is a system that's used throughout the nation for all types of natural hazards and emergencies, whether it's COVID, whether it's hurricanes, floods, so on and so forth. And so staff has been undergone training for ICS for the general system, as well as position specific training as well. Furthermore, we've formalized our responses, at least for riverine flood emergencies, those that originate either from the Columbia River or the Columbia Slough, in our flood emergency action plan. So this is a document that's fairly robust, comprehensive, and has been shared with other agency partners, and one that we follow very closely during all types of emergencies. We continue to do annual trainings, whether that's in the office or on Zoom, I guess, and recently, as well as do field exercises. And that's through not only ourselves, but for others, other partners I'll comment on here in a moment. In addition, as part of the legacy districts, the four drainage districts, we invest in capital expenses, so in capital improvements. So everywhere from making upgrades to our pump stations, other improvements identified in our capital improvement program, but also a participation in the Portland Metro levy system that the Corps is leading, as well as leading the effort to reaccredit the levies and the projects, the capital investments that are needed as part of those improvements. And we do undertake a fair amount of time to bolster our partnership with fellow emergency management specialists and agencies throughout the region, whether it's the city, county, state, or federal level. Many of them have participated in our field exercises and trainings in the past, as well as just coordination work that we do just as part of our daily work. So next slide, please. So that's what we do today. There are things that we know that would be helpful for us to be a more prepared and fully fully functional emergency management agency. And those include both personnel staff capacity, whether that's individual staff time, trying to fit this work into our existing workload for trainings and other pieces. As Colin referenced, we have Matt on board as a dedicated emergency management specialist, but he's half-time, so it'd be advantageous for us to have someone with a little more capacity than that. We have automated systems particularly in our conveyance system already. Those are primarily our automated trash rake systems and our pump stations, but there are only 3 out of 12 that have those type of automated systems. So what does that mean? Well, that means that during a big event, particularly an internal event, rainfall behind the levee system, there's a lot of manual labor that is required in order to keep those pump stations operating. And so investing more in automated systems should reduce that and allow us to fight not just flooding situations internally, but on a riverine situation as well. We have identified a need to make more efficient closure structures beyond just sandbags, and we've made some investments in there, but more is to be done. And one big piece is that we need more planning and details fleshed out for situations where we need to operate in an event when MCDD floods. And that occurs when, if our campus is at the bottom of the watershed. And so when it floods, we're not able to operate out of our system. So we need an alternative location to do that. There are options for that, but we haven't tracked those details down yet. And we need to do so as opposed to doing it just on the fly. I mentioned that we have a pretty robust flood emergency action plan for riverine situations for the river or the slough. We feel like we know what we need to do during internal events for rainfall and snowmelt behind the levees, but that's stuck in people's heads right now. And so it would be ideal to get that documented in a similar manner. We've been focused a lot on prevention and preparedness and response, but there is a need to do more work to understand what our role is in the community for recovery. And part of that is allowing people to know what risks that their property exists for flooding situations. So there's more of an effort needed to reach out to the community, whether it's private businesses or place markers or so forth. And we do beyond the work that we've already done with building partnerships. We also have a need to have a better understanding of when a very large event happens, like a 1996 event or higher, a water situation. We need to understand what our role is in the larger response, and so and what those expectations are. So the expectations of the county or others during those larger events. So those are the known gaps, and if Alice has joined us, I think this is a good time to transition to her to talk about what the county does and take it from there. So take it away, Alice. Thanks.
Thanks. And please let me know if anybody has any questions. My name's Alice Bush. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Multnomah County Emergency Management. Before I started in emergency management, I spent 22 years in the fire service, and I've been with the county now for 10 years. So I'm very familiar with the chart on the right-hand side of this slide, which shows first responders as kind of in keeping with FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency's mantra of all disasters are local. And the way that hierarchy works, as probably many of you know, is we try and address disasters with local resources. When local resources are outstripped, Then they move into a county level. When the county level is outstripped, we move into the region, and then we move into the state, and then we go federal. The interesting thing about us is we sometimes that doesn't follow that normal progression. And with lots of cases with our river areas, with the Coast Guard as the lead agency, we bump right into federal engagement pretty quickly. And that's a formalized process of finding out, number one, that there's an issue, and only the county can submit a resource request to state or federal agencies. So it doesn't matter where the problem originates, that process goes through the county and then goes to the state and up to the federal government. And I think one of the things that I was talking to our partners about before doing this presentation is maybe what all of you on the call might be interested in hearing. And so if I don't cover something, then you have a question, I'd love to field any questions that you might have. During larger scale emergency response incidents, there are a lot of locals. So even though things start locally, like Colin discussed, we and Bill, we have a lot of partners that are engaged in this work, and each partner has done exactly what MCDD has done, and that is come up with plans, done some training and some internal practicing. But I think what we are all shy on is that those practices that bring us all together, and we learn what each other is planning to do and where those pain points are going to exist of, hey, we were going to stage right here and you got all your stuff over there, or that's not the communications channel that works for our team, whatever. There's a number of issues that we encounter when we bring all of those different agencies that have a role in this kind of response together, and we don't do near enough of that. It's really a complex process of bringing all those folks together. And I think we all share some of the gaps. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that also. So I would say, one of the gaps for all of us is not enough of that larger scale interdisciplinary multi-jurisdiction practicing together. And that is one of the roles of county emergency management agencies, is to be kind of the convener, the bringer together of all of these disparate organizations that have a role. And if you can imagine, if we have any kind of incident with the levee system, we impact the Coast Guard to local fire and law for evacuations and sheltering, and culturally specific community support and communications and public information. So it's a really, really broad group of people that we need to bring together, and that's pretty challenging. We have done some of that in the past, and unfortunately, sometimes it's been during a response. And we have spent a lot of time working with MCDD. They're a really good partner for us, and we participate in trainings together and practice, and we have, some discussions that we have where we bring up issues that we think we need to address. Unfortunately, I think what we have all discovered is that our infrastructure, our structures in our agencies really does allow us to come together during a response when we really need help right away. Unfortunately, that's not adequate. What we need to all start doing, and the county included, is building in that work, the plans, the practice, the training in our normal, routine, everyday work plans. And I think it's really wonderful to hear that there's an acknowledged gap in the amount of FTE dedicated at MCDD, and certainly for this larger jurisdiction that's being developed as it relates to emergency management. And a gap that exists in most of the agencies that I work with, including my own, is an understanding of the level of commitment and contribution that every employee in the agency needs to make sure that we're actually disaster response ready and taking care of our communities the way we have been entrusted to do. And that requires the subject matter expertise of the people that are technical experts, looking at, reading and reviewing plans and contributing to those planning documents, the standard operating procedures, the participating in the exercises, and updating those plans when we learn that one of the things that we thought would be wonderful isn't quite so wonderful. In addition to enhancing and growing the emergency management FTE, I would strongly recommend that an awareness begins about putting in people's job descriptions the responsibilities of being disaster response ready, and really articulating what that means, and supporting people in doing that, giving them credit in their performance reviews for participating in that work. Of course, I'm speaking from experience here that that's a gap that exists in Multnomah County as well, and doing a lot of work in our own agency to try and convince people that there's no such thing as an emergency management emergency. Those emergencies engage our communications team and our health team and our sheriff's office, et cetera. So I think one of the ways that we have been discussing how we may be able to contribute to this is we have a lot of liaisons into the community, the public health agency, our human services, the county is a safety net provider, and we have long-term, credible, trusted relationships with some of our culturally specific community organizations and communities. And we can certainly partner with the district on reaching out to those communities and doing outreach and education, translation work, et cetera, focus groups and whatever is needed to make sure that we're engaging the people that are impacted and having them be really participatory in how we do that work and what they need, and making sure that we are addressing what they need, not what we think they need. And then we also recently talked about, we have a community-based organization, continuity of operations toolkit that we are rolling out across the county for with a focus on our contracted agencies and organizations. The county is responsible for a lot of things, and with shrinking government, we've contracted a lot of that responsibility out to smaller organizations, and a lot of these organizations don't have any continuity of operations plan or capability. And instead of just requiring them to have a plan that they can't implement, we are starting to work on educating them on how to stay in operations so that they can continue to do the things that we really need them to do. And so that's something that we can partner with the district on, is working with the business communities that might be in inundation zones, and making sure that we're providing support and education about how, if they do have an interruption because of any failure of the physical infrastructure, that they have a plan and can stand their business back up, and we don't have any preventable economic impacts from any incidents. And that's pretty much all I put together to talk about, but I would love to see if there's any questions about how the county can support the district in emergency management activities. Excellent. I must have been incredibly thorough. Thank you. And I apologize if there aren't any questions. We are gearing up for a power shutoff because of the fire behavior and winds that are coming. So there's a possibility that we're going to have a lot of power outages in the next few days. So I really do need to run to address those issues. So I'm going to give one more moment for questions.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Anytime. Thank you so much for all of your work.
So
Thank you,
Alan,
Alice.
Yes.
just one question. You mentioned that the county is in charge of bringing people together for these multiple mock events, I think is what you were referring to. So is that, I would assume that our staff would be supportive of that, and do they generally need to wait for the county to institute it?
Oh, that's a really good question. No, what we do on an annual basis is we have something called a master exercise planning program, where we poll all of the served agencies, and you're one of the served agencies, and we say, hey, what's on your priority agenda for training and exercises this year? It's a multiple year training and exercise plan. And everyone gives us their objectives, kind of the functions that people want to practice. And then anytime we either coordinate those ourselves, or we make sure that people are connected when someone else is hosting an exercise that incorporates those elements. Or if your district wants to host it, then we help make sure that all of the participating agencies that we know about are engaged and invited, and then we help kind of set up the exercise plan.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
All right, well, thank you so much, Alice. There's just a few more, I think 2 more slides that we're gonna quickly go through, but if any questions come up for Alice after she leaves, be sure to get those questions over to you, or we'll
Excellent.
take a cut at answering them in your
Love it.
absence. So thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, there's just a couple more slides that we wanted to go through about what our what the future looks like, and it, you know, it largely responds to addressing some of those gaps. So if you go to the next slide, please. So we do know that the future looks like larger and more frequent events. And in fact, in ORS 550 and the enabling legislation for this district, it directly directs us to prepare and adapt for climate adaptation, and to really get ahead of some of this emergency preparedness needs. It seems like every week, or now even more frequently, we're seeing these huge rain events, places like Death Valley where they don't normally see them. In fact, Bill and I were chatting yesterday about this presentation, and I got a push notification on my phone saying that in South Korea that there was 40 inches of rain that came ashore from a typhoon just as we were talking. And so we know that for our system, we will see more frequent and large rain events. And our greatest threat that we know of is the rain on snow events, and especially for riverine flooding. So we have to prepare for that future. If you go to the next slide, please, Wendy. There's a number of ways that we are going to prepare for that, and we also want to get some input on that in a few minutes here. But as you noted, or as Alice noted before, one of the main things, doing more of what we do currently, but plus sizing it, basically having this part of our normal everyday work plans, increasing some of the FTE, as Bill noted, having a full-time emergency manager and planner would really help the capacity, as well as having additional capacity for training and exercises built into all of our staff's work plans. We also need to do more to address structural gaps. And so we're actually making great progress on some of those structural gaps. Bill noted some of the things around automating our systems, our participation with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the Portland Metro Levee System addresses a number of places throughout the system that either need automated closures or have low spots, or places that we currently in our emergency plans, our flood emergency action plan, calls for our staff to put down hundreds, if not thousands, of sandbags. And so by addressing some of those structural gaps, it will allow us to respond to flood emergencies more efficiently. It will allow our staff to really be able to focus on the higher risk areas and not spend a ton of time preparing some of those low spots. And so we also need to invest in an integrated approach. And so emergency preparedness is one of those great examples of different ways that we're approaching flood safety, environmental projects, and climate adaptation and resiliency coming together. So investments in green infrastructure, elevating the voices of the most vulnerable communities, the environmental justice communities that wouldn't be able to either evacuate or might not have the information, being able to integrate climate adaptation into elevating some of our structures, moving things out of harm's way. Emergency planning is a place where all of that information can come together. We can process it, come up with a plan, and move forward. And speaking of preparing for climate change, we really do need to be able to plan for those major events and have solid actions to take, especially for the internal events. Bill made a note that we are working on putting together that internal system emergency action plan, as well as needing to update our flood emergency action plans. We also need to do a lot more to focus on recovery, knowing that large events will happen and that there will be flooding. We do need to focus on our role in recovery, as well as our role in partnering in the community. And so that includes things like having the continuity of operations planning. Our current campus is located in the managed floodplain. I am actually looking out at where a breach happened during the 1948 Vanport flood, right outside this window. And so we know that to be able to continue to provide flood safety and to recover post-event, we are going to need to locate some of our services outside of the managed floodplain. And then we have a really important role and opportunity around flood risk education. And thinking of the mandates, in addition to the communications role, this also can incorporate some of the mandates around cultural history. And so our role and mandate to help educate our community about flood risk involves making sure that people know what they need to do, know where they can get information, their responsibility as far as mitigating risk, as well as larger responsibility of the organization and cities and others. There's also a huge role for cultural history here to really help educate from what we learned in the past. And so to bring those stories forward, to know what flood damage has done in the past and how we have not properly or adequately responded to that really helps tell the stories and really gets people to understand why flood risk, though it doesn't happen all that often, when it does happen, is so devastating. And finally, you've heard a number of the kind of through line throughout this presentation has been about partnership. We really do rely on our partnerships with the Army Corps of Engineers, with Multnomah County, and with the city's emergency management organizations, and we will continue to build those. There's a number of things outside of this presentation that we're also currently doing with the county. We're going through annexation process to have a natural hazard mitigation plan annexed into the county's natural hazard mitigation plan. We're also working with the Army Corps of Engineers through the Rehabilitation and Inspection Program that will help identify any problem areas, and also allows the Army Corps of Engineers to come in and help us flood fight and then to rebuild post-event. So we'll continue to bolster those partnerships and find new partnerships, especially with community-based organizations and some entities that represent communities that haven't had a seat at the table in the past. With that, we're going to turn it to some questions. I think we might be doing breakout groups, but I guess maybe, are there questions? Wendy, are we planning on doing questions as a group before we do the breakouts?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Clarifying questions.
Nancy.
Uh-oh. Hang on.
All right, anyone else while Nancy fields that call? Eric.
Yeah, let me unmute myself. So just a couple of things. Ground me a little bit. We often talk about the maximum probable event. When we talk about this in terms of rainfall, what are we actually planning for? Is it a 5-inch deluge? What are we talking about there?
Gonna defer to Bill on that, and then I can talk a little bit about what the Army Corps is putting into their plans.
Yeah, so we don't. So I'll answer the question in a couple of different ways. One, the cities and the county have design standards in order to build their infrastructure. For instance, the county, I know the city of Gresham uses the 25-year event to convey water through culverts. And that 25-year event correspond to a theoretical rainfall event. I don't know what that number is offhand. I can look that up for you and circle back. The river, so that's internal. That's for internal flooding. The pump stations that we own and operate, manage, range in capacity anywhere from a 2-year event, which is super small and doesn't have the right capacity, up to a 100-year event, which is great for a flood control agency. We hope to have at least a 25-year event to manage water coming into our pump stations throughout, and we're building our CIPs along those lines. I can't tell you a particular rainfall event from the riverine risks for the Columbia River or the slough, in part because the rainfall runoff process is so complicated for the entire Columbia River basin. So if that was not enough, just a natural rainfall process, we have all of those dams that are upstream that can help manage releases. So there's not one rainfall number, but what we do try to watch is water levels, and the levees are designed for a particular water level, a design level. So those were associated with 1893 flood events that occurred in this area, and so it was a certain elevation. So it was more about flood elevation for the river, and those comments I made about internal flooding. So I'm sorry, I'm sorry I can't give you a particular rainfall.
So Bill, one of the things that I would urge you to do is, let me use something that I call the bathtub analogy. You know, previously when we've talked to our neighbors about flood risk, it's always been with the river rising and then coming into this basin and filling up the bathtub, which is the managed floodplain we lived in. In the future, it's really more of the Pineapple Express getting stuck someplace over the Willamette Valley and dumping 9 to 12 inches of rain in a short period of time. It's as if the faucet in the bathtub is creating that problem. So within that, I think that we need to do something fairly significant about changing the public's perception of where the risk lies. And as Colin knows, poor little Cranston, Rhode Island, just down the road from where he used to live, got 10.8 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. You know, it's not reasonable for people to have systems built for that, but we really need to take that into account. And I guess my third comment is, I really want to see something that's called a failure mode effect analysis in our planning, because as Alice Bush said, you know, what she's concerned about most, as she signed off now, was power outages. And we have no emergency backup for the pumps, you know, other than Pacific Power. You know, but if their lines go down, the pumps stop. So I'd like to see that FMEA. I know it's really similar to FEMA, but it's a different concept. It's the failure modes put into our plan. Does any of that resonate with you?
It absolutely does, Eric. And we already are planning and have implemented some of that already.
Excellent.
So the pump station next to the office where I'm at has an emergency connection that allows us to run 3 out of the 5 pumps with a tractor trailer sized generator. So if complete power is gone, we can at least continue to run operations. And our CIPs all have references to similar type of emergency connections. So we're already thinking about it in the capital side of it. And as Colin referenced before, we're going to be doing more of that in the planning work, including a need to develop our own continuity of operations plan that we don't currently have but need.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And currently the most of the products that are going into our CIP, including things like drainage master plans, the Portland Metro levy study, a lot of the analysis on that, the back end of that is risk-informed decision-making that does really take into account what the risk and the residual risk and how much you can actually buy down from particular investments. So I think that's something that we're not only currently doing, but we definitely want to amplify in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
I think Nancy, I think you're next, and then I believe Councillor Craddock, and then Ed Washington. Is your hand still up, Nancy? Then I think Councillor Craddock, you're next.
Thank you. This is a more specific question and kind of a curiosity question. So what work is the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District doing regarding the water fields that we have along the levee system? You know, obviously the city of Gresham, city of Portland, I believe Fairview, all have wells there that are right in the floodplain. And so what kind of arrangements and what are the plans for if we do have flooding in those areas, that those water systems are protected?
Bill, I think you might be best prepped to at least our coordination with the Water Bureau.
The short answer is we probably need more preparation for that. We do connect with the Water Bureau staff regularly. I've not been in a conversation where they're asking us about what does flood proofing look like around around any of their well field sites. That's an excellent question. You know, even furthermore than that, those individual issues, individual sites along the Columbia River there, we're also aware that there's a scenario where there could be a dam break up Bull Run, and water can flow down towards Troutdale. And so what does that corresponding water elevation look like? And how do our current levee system features there could protect the system there? There's, as you're well aware, there's many industries behind there, but the city of Troutdale also has its treatment facility right behind our levee system. So lots of important infrastructure. So more work needs to be done to answer that specific question, but that's what we've done today.
If I could just follow up, I mean, obviously in the recent news, all the excessive rain that's been occurring in the Midwest, I mean, we're hearing a lot about water systems failing. And I would assume this is something that would be at the top of our list to be paying attention to and making plans for. Obviously, you have many other responsibilities to make sure that we're safe, but I would think water or having access to good, clean water would be at the top of the list.
I think that's a great point, and it's definitely something that was part of the analysis with the Army Corps of Engineers and in our certification studies as well, just about how important all the critical infrastructure is. A lot of that was focused on what investments do we need to keep that from flooding, but I think your point is that we also need to think about post-disaster with the inevitability of some of these large storms. How do we get them back up and running. And our role is definitely around getting that water out of the system, rebuilding our flood safety infrastructure, but it needs to be in coordination with the responsible entities that would need to get their systems back and running. Thank you. Ed, I believe you're next. Oh, you're on mute.
My apologies. With all of the work and studies that you all have been doing over the past probably more than several years, and I'm sure that you probably, I would assume you probably use maybe the flood that destroyed Vanport as sort of the watermark for our era. But as we look out all over the country, and really not just all over the country, but all over the world, we're getting weather things that nobody's ever seen before. And I just find it hard to believe that it's not going to visit us sooner or later, and probably more sooner than later. How do you really prepare for that? Do you, I know most times you say we don't want to frighten people. The bottom line is that we've done a pretty bad job of protecting ourselves, and we have messed it up a lot. How do you get through to people, let them know that, you know, they've got to change some things, and they can't wait for 50 years, because I guarantee you, if something happens in the next 5 years, they'll be all over us as to why did we do something. So how do we not only protect our integrity, but mostly how do we protect the people? Because I just think that these events are not that far away from us. They're probably a lot closer than they are long distance away.
I can take a first crack at I think so much of it is really on our community outreach and education, and really getting people to understand sort of what the risks are, and being comfortable with some of those uncomfortable topics around that, you know, there are going to be future events that might overwhelm the levee system. There's future rain events that might overwhelm our internal system. So to have those difficult conversations and educate people about what they can do and how they can support that, I think is one aspect of it. And then the other aspect that we're currently working on is definitely on just recognizing those uncertainties. And so our engineering team has considered things that could be done on the landward side of the levee that would basically allow for overtopping without basically destroying the levee, so that you could, the levee, you know, once the water would be pumped out, you could operate the levee again. Similarly, the Army Corps of Engineers studies have looked at running 1,000-year events through our rain events through a system, and have identified elevating our pump station. So we're definitely focused on our infrastructure, but also on that education and what our role in communicating flood safety and risk is regionally. And
just one final thing, as we are all meeting and trying to put this whole situation together, and knowing that at some time in the very, very near future, that we're going to have to go to the public about how we reimagine this organization. And I just don't think that there's any greater, I use the word weapon, not as in a negative sense, but I think that if we cannot prove to people the necessity for this organization and the changes that we're going to be asking for, when we have all the evidence in the world right at our doorsteps. I think sometimes, and I'm not saying people here, anybody here, sometimes I think we just try to be a little too careful about telling people, telling it like it is. And if we don't tell them what it's like, I think that's every indication for having a strong, this agency being right at the very top, because it's here to protect people and to protect property. And I just think we have to get away from saying, well, I don't know if we can go there and say we got to have a tax. Well, what's better, a little tax or you lose everything? So I really appreciate what you're doing. And I'm just sitting here thinking about everything that you've talked about today. And I'm sure that we're very fortunate to be getting this, but it needs to go out much farther than just us. And I know sometimes we say, well, we don't want to scare people. Well, sometimes you're going to have to scare people. Because I guarantee you, if a flood come roaring down on their behinds, that's going to scare the living daylights out of them. So much better scare them before the dike break than to scare them after it's all done and they've lost everything. So I appreciate what you're doing. I really do. And it's a real eye opener. It's a real eye opener. Everywhere.
This is the crux of the debate around some of the new mandates and climate resilience and what is a reasonable ask of the community that you all will have to decide. So thank you for engaging in this. It keeps me up at night, I'll be honest. More than a couple of inches in 24 hours and we're busy and there's trouble. So.
Yeah. And I think we have time for one more question. Nancy, it looks like you're back. So last question, I think, and then I'll hand it over to Wendy if there is time for breakouts, or maybe that needs to be done at the end if there's room left. So go ahead, Nancy. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just share that in 1996, when we had that high water event, because it didn't flood inside the districts, I was very new at the city, and we were, MCD was much smaller at that time. And so a bunch of city workers went to help out at MCDD. And so I was sitting sort of where Colin is sitting now. And I did not realize at the time, speaking of people not being aware of where they are in the floodplain, I was certainly unaware of where I was. And I think I would have been a lot more nervous if I knew I was at the bottom of it instead of the top. But that does make me think of what you're saying about having an alternate place to keep your equipment and things like that out of the floodplain if we do have a flood. So even something as simple as a place that you can, something's coming, and so a couple of days ahead of time you can drive all your things up there. I think that's a really smart part of the planning effort. So I just wanted to say thanks for that.
Nancy. Okay, Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you just on time. Might need to move to next agenda item, and if there's time at the end, we can send out the questions. We just had a little bit of input that we wanted to solicit, but want to make sure we don't step on other agenda items.
It's really up to the board. So we're scheduled to go to the next agenda item at 2:10. So that doesn't give us time to do full breakouts. And we could hear the rest of the updates and then as time have a discussion on the questions around emergency management. I know some people have to leave at 2.
Seems to me that the board members who have commented have expressed pretty considerable concern and prioritization over this area of our programming. If those of you who have not spoken have a different opinion, I'd love to hear from you. But I think what I'm hearing from this board is direction to emphasize our program development in this space and probably potentially even prioritize investments in this space over some of the other areas. Obviously, all that needs to be worked out in detail. We're not there yet, but am I interpreting that general sense correctly? I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth.
Well, I guess I'd say, sorry, James, I'm jumping in here. Since you asked that question, Jim. I do, you know, all of the different pieces of what we are going to be doing as a new district are really important. I like the way that Colin and staff talked about incorporating the sense of place and the cultural history in the emergency management, because I think that is how we're going to have to do a lot of these different things, is integrate them together. You know, and some of the floodplain or resiliency work along the banks and stuff like that is really important for emergency plans in flooding, as well as flooding itself, like trying to avoid flooding, whether it's from the Columbia River or the slough rain, I guess. So I just say that I'm not sure I would prioritize based on, like you said, would we prioritize this over some of our other activities? And I'm not sure that my support talking about this activity today means the same as that, right?
Okay,
Like
that's
there's a lot of
helpful.
different, yeah, there's a lot of different pieces, and the more we can integrate them and have them work synergistically, the better.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And James, we'll go to you next, but I'll make one proposal that we do have about 10, 11, 12 minutes left before we go to the next item. So I would propose, instead of going to breakout sessions, that there's a lot of good discussion here. We just continue, and if you have specific ideas or answers to any of the questions Wendy has listed in the chat, let's get those out in the next 12 minutes and give staff some good direction. Does anybody have an objection to that? Want to spend more time in breakout sessions at a different meeting on this?
I would note at least one of you has asked for a private meeting about risk, and we're happy to sit down with any of you individually or collectively at your desire to answer more questions about our thinking on this.
Okay, James, go ahead.
Great, thank you, folks. What I was going to say is, if we're tabling our responses to the questions that were posed, at some point I appreciate hearing from other board members on this topic. And I would appreciate, you know, at some point, what's our shared understanding around this topic? We're not going to agree on everything, but what is our shared understanding? Because when I look at the topic of emergency management, particularly as it was posed here, which is, it's not just responsiveness, it's being ready from a capital perspective. What is the current status of our system, to how do we deal with an actual incident? This is, from my perspective, this is what we do. This is entirely what we do. And so I guess what I would just want to capture in terms of my own perspectives is absolutely yes, that we're doing this PMLS project. FEMA levy certification, recertification is what we do. Asset management and CIP investments, that is what we do. Overall, our mantra from my perspective is, it is better to stay out of trouble than try to get out of trouble. I think that hopefully captures, I think, what Mr. Washington is really saying. We need to have a vigilant mindset. And so I think the full-time emergency planner is a must for what we do. And then in terms of, I won't say these are my concerns, but as we go from capital investments in the system and planning, when we look at recovery planning, I think we need to really invest in drilling. Any of you folks who've been involved in incident response, whether it's been an actual incident or training, it takes a lot of practice to do it right, and it has to be refreshed. There's a big forgetting curve with how to do incident management. So I think we need to invest in our agency's ability to really do incident management when it happens, and not wrestle with roles and responsibilities and interagency coordination. And then lastly, I'll say, as far as education and awareness, there's different types of education and awareness. There is the education and awareness that will go into large public messaging around bond measures and what the new agency does. But really, for the people who live in the managed floodplain, I really think we need to couch our education and awareness around who's affected, from individuals to businesses to organizations, and look to people who are going to be there and be most impacted and find ways to have a regular, sustained relationship with them, even if it means paying them. You know, a lot of the people who are most disadvantaged, who have the most to lose in situations and have in some ways some of the greatest networks in the community, they need to be engaged. And sometimes that's going to mean having some sort of paid relationship with these organizations. I probably have more to say. I'm passionate about this topic. I probably use more than my time, but I really appreciate being engaged on this topic. Thank you.
Eric? Eric Mueller, sorry.
Okay, well, I guess just because Jim asked the question, I will give him a migraine because he thought he was getting a direction, and I guess I'm going to come down a different direction. I would prioritize this over many of the other priorities, because from my standpoint, if we don't keep people safe, and this is a critical part of it, it doesn't really matter if we have some of the other, whether it's outreach programs or communication about the cultural history of the floodplain, because if we haven't done our job in flood safety and emergency preparedness, people are going to perish. There isn't going to be anybody to educate. There isn't going to be anybody to communicate about the history of the floodplain. And so from my standpoint, this is a far higher priority than what I view are some of the new mandates versus sort of some of the traditional requirements. Again, if we don't keep people safe from the floodwater, we really can't do a lot of those other new mandates. So, sorry, Jim.
Thanks, Eric. Eric?
Just want to reiterate, this is great, you guys. I really appreciate the dialogue. This is super helpful. Keep it coming.
So as we look at this, the new news is really internal flooding. And this is something that I think has to be elevated as a priority. And in doing that, we need to take into account what the recovery time is going to be. And Councilor Craddock had a vital point to make about, you know, the safety of the water system and how long it would take us to recover from an internal flooding event that cuts out safe water for a significant amount of our community. So with that in mind, I definitely am in favor of making this a full-time position, definitely in favor of having a special focus on our CIP such that we have power backup at places like PIR. I mean, PIR doesn't even have a SCADA system. So we wouldn't know until some later point that the pumps were actually down. So we need to be in a position to prepare for these significant flood event, rainfall events that cause internal flooding that the public has never really focused on. And this year, with having 5 once in 1,000-year events in the space of 5 weeks, people are now seeing that elevated. It's now bubbling up. And we have an opportunity to come to the voters and to the public with a real plan to protect them for these extreme events. Thank you.
I'll just make a quick comment. I agree with a lot of what's been said already. This is important. To me, it's a matter of degrees, right? Yes, this is what we do. This is what the organization does. I think the value, a big part of the value of this discussion is trying to help Jim and staff determine what does it mean? To fill those gaps? You know, to what degree are we filling them? How much are we spending, and how does that inform the financial analysis, really? And that's it's hard to get into that level of detail, I think, in this board meeting, but I think that's kind of where the rubber hits the road as far as this discussion goes. It's not a matter of is this important or not? Of course, it's important. It's what we do, what this organization does. It's really a matter of how aggressive do we want this new district to be in filling those gaps that these guys just talked about, and to what degree? Is that correct, Jim?
I would say that's correct. And then given that we are currently operating under the potential of having different geographies of revenue generation, you're going to need to think about who in which geographies or whether you have those separate geographies, we're going to ask to finance the improvements that you seek. So that's the next piece. How much, who pays, and from where, right? Those are the fundamental decisions this board is tasked with addressing.
Nancy?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, that's one of the reasons we're getting these presentations one right after another, right? And then we'll have heard we've heard a little bit more about each one, and then that will inform our, how much of this and how much of that discussion going forward. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
and then the other half of this, and you'll get a little bit of this, not as much as we had hoped, but you'll hear why. We'll also be bringing you, we're going to show our work underneath this on the financial aspects. And where we're going to start with that is, here's the baseline of what we have today and some of the known gaps. And here's some investments that we think from your staff's current best thinking are the priorities, but that's coming later. But again, they're coming in parallel tracks because I've heard you say you both need the impact on people plus the programmatic emphasis. So that's the thing we're straddling just now as we move forward. Hopefully the canyon will get narrow rather than wider so we can continue to straddle it.
Did that spur any other questions? We've got another minute or two before we turn it over to Ben Rowe for a financial update.
Tanny, you've been quiet. I don't want to pick on you, but you often have thoughtful things to say when you say them. So
thoughtful things. Thank you.
Yes.
I just would take it from a standpoint of, I think, when it comes down to the flood safety aspect of it, that's what we really have to get right. And that's what we're here to do. And all the other things, yes, they're important, but I think if we're going to prioritize them, this is going to be at the top of the list.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, well, we're right on time to transition over to Ben's part of this. Ben, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, take it away.
Good afternoon, Chair Fancher, board members. My name is Ben Rowe. I'm the budget manager here at the district. There is a financial update memo included in your packet. I'm just going to give you a summary of that memo. I have 4 takeaways for you today, and I hope that we can talk about this update in the context of the discussion that we just had about emergency management. I think it's related, and I think it dovetails well, especially Mr. Washington's comments. The first takeaway I have for you is at the August 3rd board meeting, the last time that we met, directors expressed an interest in a better understanding of our current and future urban district financials. So the first takeaway is we heard you and that we are coming back to you with a response to that request. So the second takeaway that I have for you is that before we respond to you, we are taking a few weeks to do further engagement, that we are being thoughtful in our response, and that we are engaging with several stakeholders because we received some feedback, and we're engaging with those stakeholders to better prepare a thoughtful response as it relates to the future work of the urban district. So that's the second takeaway. The third takeaway is when we come back to the board with our more detailed financials of the current and future urban district and the forecast of our operating expenditures, our purpose, our objective is to better facilitate the board's work in adopting an equitable and legally defensible operating revenue structures that distribute costs across the community based on benefits received, and also to help facilitate a unification of the district and with other stakeholders, CBOs and local city and county partners to implement those revenue structures. The final takeaway that I have for you today is just to give you a preview of what's coming, what to expect, and what is really involved as we talk about our future expenditure forecasts. And today was one example of that. Reviewing the scopes of work that we have in the future district and building an understanding of what that looks like and what the future expense forecast and the operating revenue would need to look like to fund those programs. The final takeaway I have for you today is that as we talk about our expenditure forecast for the urban district going forward, it will be an iterative process. So it'll be very dynamic. It'll be most likely a lengthy process. And as we talk about that forecast, every decision that we make, every conversation that we make will have an impact on that forecast. So it will be a living document. It will change as we progress through the process. So I just wanted to give that preview to you. And those are the 4 takeaways I have for you. And we're planning to, again, go through this thoughtful process over the next couple of weeks to get some more feedback on how best to characterize the future financial forecast of the urban district to help facilitate your future work. And we're looking to come back to you with that information in late September or October. Thank you for your time.
Any questions for Ben?
I feel the need to emphasize a point, which is we were going to roll out a version of a baseline number, and we got some really helpful feedback from some of you to take another week or so, have some additional conversations. And in particular, one of the requests that really resonated with me was try and break out your baseline expenditures consistent with your programmatic areas that we've just been talking to you about over the last series of meetings. For those of you who are unaware, our current accounting system does not do that. We have a lump budget. And so we're taking the extra time, first of all, to get feedback from some of you and some of our key payers like the Port and the City of Portland, Metro, about what they need to see to make good decisions. But then we're also going back through our historic records and really trying to do a more thorough job of allocating those lumped expenditures into programmatic areas so that we can better explain to you what the dollars are going for and who receives the benefits, so that you can make better decisions about your revenue structure. So just to try and elevate the transparency here, and as Ben said, we're going to show you versions of this that are going to get better based on your feedback. And so the first numbers are going to be first numbers. And we really want to demonstrate to you a commitment to full transparency based on the knowledge that we have of our expenditures and give you the power to set us up for success going forward. So we're going to be quick, but we're not going to hurry. And that meant take another 2 weeks to parse this and to get a little bit of additional feedback from some of you who have incredibly valuable financial expertise. So thank you for your help with that and for your wisdom to say, whoa, dude, chill, get this right. And so we're going to take the next few weeks to try not to bring you a May of 23 recommendation again. We're going to be a little more thoughtful. So that's our story. You should see something soon, and some of you will be seeing some draft work product in mere hours. So
I think that sounds great. Thank you, Ben. Thanks, Jim. If anybody has any questions, let me know. If not, Jim will roll into next steps. If there are other next steps to talk about, we are going to end on time today. I know folks have other meetings to run to at 2:30. So
I think Ben and I kind of emphasized that. So we've got some critical conversations that are on the calendar now. And so members of staff will be meeting with various folks who are smart about these things and getting some feedback. That feedback will inform a draft that we hope will be in either your next meeting packet or the one following. If any of you as individuals want more insight into this, would you let me know and we'll connect you with the right people who are working on it. We're not trying to be exclusive here. We're picking the people who have been really helpful to us on the finance side, but we're open to inviting anyone to these conversations. Lori and Ben are digging in. As you know, Lori's been on the job less than a month and she's digging into the numbers with Ben's help, and we're getting them cleaned up and bringing Janet in for her historic knowledge. So again, our objective is to continue to do these program presentations, but show you our financial work as we go. You should hear something soon. And certainly within a couple of meetings, you'll get a written document for you to begin reacting to. Lori or Ben, Colin, anything I'm missing?
No, I think that's a good summary. Thank you.
And thank you all for your patience and for the feedback that's, I think, helped us. I think we're going to bring you a better product as a result of the feedback. So thanks to those of you who offered it. That's all we have, I think. Anybody else on the team or the board need to?
Jim, we're also going to tee up the next steps around equity.
Yes, thank you. We are very close to having a final draft of the framework done. We're working on a final legal review, which is really critical. And we're really excited to get that done. And so what you'll be seeing relatively soon, again, I don't have a specific deadline, but certainly within the next week or so, you will get a red line version of the framework with board member comments and the responses to those comments embedded in the red line. And you will get a clean version as well. And our goal would be to get that to you soon, and that you will consider it and ideally determine whether you're ready to accept it, adopt it, resolve it. We're not exactly sure yet. And so that we can then build on it for our equity action planning work. And so we're very close, but wanted to make sure we did the appropriate legal review and dotted our I's and crossed our T's before we asked you to spend your time looking at it. Anything else, Wendy, Hong, Evan, on that? Thanks for your patience.
Just want to say I appreciate it getting back to me about their attendance at that September 19th meeting. We're looking for a 2/3 majority so we can pass the bylaws amendment that will allow us to meet on the third Thursday. So thanks to those of you who have gotten back to me, and there's still waiting for a couple other people. So we're very close to that 2/3.
Eric, it looked like you were about to say something. Eric Mueller.
Well, Wendy just asked what I was about to answer. What I was about to ask about. I wanted to make sure I knew when the next meeting was. So thank you.
And just full disclosure, I will be on vacation for your next meeting, but your able team will, I'm sure, do an excellent job. All right, we appreciate you guys and all your time and advice. Thank you so much for your help with all of this.
Any other final questions for Jim or the team? I'm not seeing any. I think we can actually end this meeting early today. Give everybody 9 minutes. Oh, it's slipping on us. 9 minutes back in your day. Thank you very much. So with that, we're going to close the September 7th meeting of the district. Thank you all.
Thank you.